Okay, so that's successfully created. Now both will show up. Here we have the My Linux web app and it shows production. That's the default. We have the development, but that's just because I labeled it that way, both in the same app service plan. Notice the traffic percentage here. Okay, they are both running, but all of the traffic is going to production. Now, if I click on deployment, it's going to take me to the overview page of that. And notice it is a different website. Okay, it's a different name, so let's open that in a new tab. But as you might imagine, this is going to look the exact same because it's just a demo. So even though it says development, it's got the exact same information. All right. So the idea then would be now you've created 2 deployment slots. You're going to deploy your production code in one, but then I'm going to be able to deploy updates in the other deployment slot. And then I can flip them when that's necessary. Down here under settings, you have a number of other things as well. Let's look at doing backups. Okay, so we're going to go to the backups, and you can see that backup is not configured. So you would simply select configure. Okay, we look first, backup storage. Storage is not configured. If you select that, then you are going to be able to either create or utilize an existing storage account. So I'm going to just say web app 1234 storage. That does have to be a unique name. Storage general purpose V1. Standard performance is fine. Locally redundant storage is fine. That's a good location. TLS version, fine. Okay. We're basically just creating a storage account to store the backups for our web application. Now, as it goes with storage accounts, which we've already discussed, this with backups, it is typically going to be blob storage. So that means that the next step, once this storage account is deployed, would be to create a container within that storage account to store my backup. So I click on it. We have containers. I'll add a container, and we'll just call it backups. And then this can either be public or private, as we've discussed before. In our case, really this should be just private. This is for storing backups. We'll hit create. All right, now if I select the container, that's going to take me back because, of course, we started this whole thing by clicking on that. All right. Then I'm just going to set up a scheduled backup. I'm going to say back it up every, whatever you want. So we'll just say back it up every hour. And we're going to start the backup schedule now. We can control retention of items. So retention is 30 days. We want to keep at least one backup, yes. And then if you've got a database to go along with it, you can do that as well. When you're done, you hit save, and now you've configured a scheduled backup for the web application. All right, so that's going to complete the demonstration. Obviously, there's a lot more you can do from the code side, but that's not really our concern. We need to know how to set this up from an administrative perspective. And so we can set up the application itself, the app service. We can link it to an app service plan, which defines availability as well as compute power. And then we can configure deployment slots to allow developers to test updates and basically deploy applications simultaneously side by side, and then decide when they're going to make that switch into production. Additionally, we also looked at making sure that we have an adequate backup of these application services. Now, when you deploy web apps, a web app on Windows, Linux, mobile backend, whatever, to an Azure API or app service, you can use separate deployment slots instead of the default production slots. Now, this is if you're running in the standard premium or isolated tiers that we've seen. Basically, deployment slots are just live apps with their own host names. The app content, configuration elements can be swapped between 2 deployment slots, including a production slot. So if you think about this, it gives us the ability to isolate a web application in a slot that's separate from the production slot, which is internet facing, which is what clients are using, right? So it provides the ability for really it's providing the ability for developers, right, to stage applications, to do deployment testing prior to moving it to production. And then as admins, we can simply do a swap. And that swap can happen manually, or that swap can happen automatically based on the options that you've configured. Securing services is another important element to the management of app services from an administrator perspective. So let's kind of talk about and discuss this. Now, the app service provides built-in authentication and authorization support. Okay, that is going to give us the ability to authenticate individuals based on Azure AD or based on other identity providers. That is going to give us the ability to authorize their access to a particular app service and things like that, and manage session tokens and whatnot. So we already said it integrated with the popular identity providers. The authorization behavior, you can configure it with a couple different behaviors. So we can allow anonymous request, which is basically allows unauthenticated traffic, or we can require authentication request, and then we specify the provider, and anybody who doesn't authenticate would then be unauthorized. We also enable application logging, and when we do that, we'll see the authentication authorization traces directly in the log files, and we can also use that to troubleshoot errors. So those are a couple of the security things that we have available to us. Backup and restore is another management aspect. This allows you to easily create app backups either manually or on a scheduled basis. It'll back up the application configuration, file content, connected databases, those kinds of or those elements. It does require the standard tier or the premium tier, and obviously then requires a storage account anytime you're backing things up. Backup storage accounts, you will have to pick whether you want to do full backups or partial backups. We can exclude things. I mean, those are pretty common backup capabilities that we would have for backing up and then also restoring Azure App Services.